My name is Andy Lalino, and I do movie screenings. I'm a filmmaker. We've done a lot of activities here at the Tampa Pitcher Show, which is where I am currently.
Thank you. I don't know if you remember from my email, I said I was writing a story that it's kind of discussing how horror films of any, like the mainstream, they tend to reflect the fears of society, like during the time they were made, like 70s horror film. You get a lot of, like you have like a lot of environmental kind of bug type movies, stuff like that, and then 80s we have like the slasher kind of Reagan era films. So I just kind of wanted to get, first off, just your thoughts on that idea, since you being like a sci-fi kind of horror person. I just want to get your thoughts on that really quick, like what you think of that idea.
The idea that the fear is kind of representative of the times of a particular decade that we lived in.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think, I remember I grew up in half in the 70s and half in the 80s, and I can tell you that in the 70s, at least from a kid's perspective, one of the things that scared me most was the conspiratorialist type of subject matter where, the government was, out to get you. Movies like Capricorn 1, which was made in 1978, where you weren't sure if the government was like totally being truthful with you or drugging you in order to, make you submissive or to alter reality. That was a very scary thing in those times. The environmental thing was obviously of concern to a lot of people, especially environmentalists, people who love nature. And like you said, it was reflected in the bug movies like Frogs and things like, which were shot in Florida, things like that. Yes, I think there's a lot of truth to that. The 80s was a very kind of a girls just want to have fun kind of decade. The popularity of Halloween and Friday the 13th spilled over into the early 1980s. With a lot of the slasher films coming out, that kind of petered out toward the late 1980s, but it was definitely very popular. I think the 80s kind of generated a lot of imitation. That everybody wanted to be like Halloween and Friday the 13th, and Nightmare on Elm Street was born out of that, horror hero type of concept. And they were very successful with it. It was a very successful decade for horror, and that's what I remember of those two decades.
Interesting. And I notice, art tends to reflect life in any medium, film, books, in any genre, but I notice a lot of it in horror particularly. Why would you think, based on your experience in filmmaking, why would you think that would be? Why does horror seem to be the most reflective of society, it seems like?
Well, I think, it all comes down to fear. We're, basically man is afraid of pretty much anything and everything. How do I fit into society? How do I cope with society? Do I have enough bravery to, talk to the girl across the room, say hi to her, and, the girl maybe is afraid of the guy because, they're just kind of physically bigger. It's all those little small fears that kind of add up to big ones. And I think horror is just a great way to express that, because you can do it, in shadow and in story and in cinematography, production design, reflect all that all at one time, and it just, when you watch it, it just kind of hits the innermost core of a human being, which is, H.P. Lovecraft said it, fear is the oldest and darkest, emotion that man has. And I think it just all boils down to that.
Fear seems to be such a binding thing for an audience in a horror movie, I've noticed. I know you have a lot of experience as a filmmaker, screenwriter, producer, and director. Have you noticed, like in the movies you've been a part of producing and making, have you noticed this at all, like a tendency to use what's going on in the world in a horror movie? Have you noticed anything like that or experienced that in filmmaking at all?
Most definitely, because the movies that I've been involved in, they were all very exploitive, but at the same time I think they all had a lot to say about a lot of things. I made a movie called Filthy back in 2004, and looking back on that film, it said a lot about female empowerment, how males and females treat each other, the media. That's all evident in Filthy. It's easy to dismiss Filthy as like a, cheap, gory horror film, but there's a lot more to it than that. Same thing with Brainjacked in 2010. I think director Andrew Allen, we both wrote the screenplay together, but we tried to incorporate, if you watch the movie, the conspiratorialist aspect is there. The way doctors treat their patients, runaways, dysfunctional homes. And then when we did the Uh-Oh show in 2012, Herschell Lewis kind of dealt with all that again. It was his screenplay. He directed, made a statement about, game shows and what people will do, what lengths people will go to become popular or become rich. So it's all evident in every film that I've been included in, and I'm proud of that fact.
Do you think that's mostly a conscious effort on the part of the filmmaker to put that in there or to relate it to reality, or do you think maybe it could be some of, like, we're afraid of that ourselves, like I'm a filmmaker, I'm afraid of it myself, and it's kind of projecting itself onto the filmmaking process?
I think it's probably a little bit of both. I know that subconsciously, and you probably know this, when you write, it just comes out of you because that's who you are. I mean, everything that you or I have, kind of soaked up during our lifetimes is going to come out in our writing, and you might not even realize it. You might write something and say, oh yeah, that's what I really meant to say, or that's, wow, I'm surprised it turned out that way, but that was lurking in your subconscious, and I think that's what happens in at least most of my instances.
You talked a little bit about growing up in the horror movies that kind of affected you that way. What film do you remember had like the biggest effect on you in that way? Like from when you can remember what was going on in the world and stuff like that?
I remember being most afraid. I won't say it's like what was going on in the world, because when we're all young, like 6, 7, 8, we don't know a lot about what goes on in the world. We just kind of with our parents most of the time. But I remember seeing a couple of movies. One was Let's Scare Jessica to Death, which was made in, I think, 73, I believe, or maybe 71. And I saw that on TV, and I could, after seeing that, especially the end, which I don't want to give it away, but that just scared me silly for many nights. I couldn't sleep for, I can't tell you. Another movie was Don't Be Afraid of the Dark, which I think was 73 also. It's a made-for-TV movie with little creatures that would come out of a fireplace and kind of terrorize this woman who lived alone in a house, which they did a remake of it. Guillermo del Toro did a remake of it recently, but those were very scary movies. And I remember also I wasn't allowed to see The Exorcist because my mom and dad wouldn't let me at a certain age, and I totally respected that. And I'm glad they, in retrospect, I'm glad they didn't let me. But I remember seeing the book and kind of seeing images of it in some monster magazines or hardcover books that I had in the 70s, and your imagination takes over. You're like, what is this girl? What's happening to her? What is going on here? And so you make up the monsters in your mind. Reagan, the girl in The Exorcist, her character, just so scary the way she looked, and then you kind of pictured her kind of shambling down your hallway in your house, which just made that just twice as scary. And I remember my mother owning another book called Helter Skelter, which was about the Charles Manson murders, and I remember seeing the made-for-TV movie for that. That was incredibly scary. But the book, the paperback book of Helter Skelter, had shots of the murder scenes, but they were whited out. It was like so you couldn't see them. So your imagination kind of put the dead bodies in there that you saw from the actual crime photos. So that was another very scary moment from the 70s. It wasn't even really a movie. It was just a paperback book.
Right. Have you noticed anything in particular that has come out somewhat recently that has kind of picked up on what's been going on in the world? I know the past couple of years have been some stuff, we've been through some stuff. Have you noticed anything in the recent horror movies that you've seen?
Well, if you would consider like movies like Land of the Dead and The Devil's Rejects recent, I thought those were a couple of the best horror movies since the 1980s. I was really impressed. You know, I saw The Devil's Rejects again recently, and I was just really blown away by how good it was. You know, a lot of the statements that you know, Rob Zombie had made, and you know, the way the police officers handle their own psychosis and are dealing with psychopaths and the behavior of the psychopaths, and it was just a really good essay on, you know, just kind of real life crime, and very different from the original. The original House of a Thousand Corpses was you know, more of a fantasy. This one was very realistic, and I thought they did a great job with it. Land of the Dead, George Romero's movie, was just a great you know, part 4 of the zombie lore that he created. And you know, he did a lot of his own commentary, not that I agree with it, but his own commentary on, you know, society, you know, things, and he really did, I think, a great job with it, just, you know, from beginning to end, like all these commentaries, and he didn't, you know, condemn any particular social strata. They were all kind of addressed during the movie, and he said, okay, well, maybe the rich people aren't so bad, maybe the poor people aren't so bad, let's just all work together and try to solve these problems.
Right. And finally, I'm trying to keep it short, but finally, I'm trying to keep it short. Do you think that major events in history, like, stuff happens all the time, but like major events, do you think that has any effect on horror movie ticket sales when we kind of start to catch up and they start to kind of reflect what we went through, like maybe like post-Vietnam, like those kinds of movies? Do you think that has an effect on ticket sales at all, or how many people go to see horror films?
I think it does. I know after 9/11, you know, both comedies and horror films were kind of shunned for a little bit. You know, people were so shocked by what happened, they didn't know what to like. Totally understandable. It happened to me. I mean, I was like, you know, you kind of reassessed yourself, and then it took a while to get back into it. And I remember the 70s, and there were, even though it was kind of a dark period, you know, with Vietnam just ending, and actually it was going on during the early 70s, kind of ended, I think, in 74. But a lot of the filmmakers were influenced by that, what happened during that war, you know, the great filmmakers even, and they wanted to make statements about it, and agree or disagree with their point of view. I think it was going to come out, and it was just going to be part of the cinematic landscape at that time.
Well, thank you so much for sitting and talking with me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.